So I'm a Professor of Digital Learning at the University of Edinburgh. I have a degree in Computer Science and Artificial Intelligence. And I can tell you when I studied that in the early 90s, the kind of AI we have now seemed quite impossible. So it's a personal astonishment for me to see it coming to fruition. I'll also say that just throughout this talk, merely to entertain myself and hopefully you, I've added in some images which are generated by my students in conjunction with various generative AI tools. So you'll see those as we go along. This one was by Antonia and DALL-E 2. We were getting the students to think about what schools of the future might be like, which is entirely appropriate because that's what we're going to be discussing this evening. Already we've alluded to the Bletchley Declaration of AI Safety, the summit which happened last week. And this has become something which is talked about not just by adults, but also by children and young people as well. So for example, Newsround had an article about this quite recently, and I was talking to a teacher last week who said that her class had been following along with what was happening at Bletchley, and they were discussing about how when they're grown up or when they're their grandparents' age, AI will just be part of the background tapestry of people's lives. So it really heartened me to hear that children were discussing it in the classroom as part of what they do. And that's a large part of the talk that I want to give today, is thinking about how we can integrate AI and discussions about AI into classroom discussions. It's been about a year since generative AI really took off. With ChatGPT and other large language models which do similar things. And as I said, when I did my degree, the promise of these things seemed very far in the future, but now it's got to the point where the advances have become so rapid that if you want to keep on top of this, you have to read the news daily rather than looking for yearly updates or so on. Now, large language models are based on a particular sort of statistical approach to artificial intelligence. They're based on machine learning, and that gives them certain properties. So one is that they rely on large amounts of data on the internet, and the other is that they rely on huge amounts of computing power to train them so that they can work. And another feature of them is that because they're statistical, even the people who develop them can't explain how those large language models generate any of the text that they write. And that's really important because we know from trial and error that they're not reliable and they're not always accurate. So on the one hand, we have this ability from ChatGPT and the other competitor products. They can generate high quality text, stories or poems or computer code, or crucially essays, which is a large part of the discussion about education. And they can pass some university level exams or the bar exam for law. But they can also just make stuff up. And so our challenge is to distinguish between those cases. When is it telling you something useful and when is it making it up? And because of the rise of these generative AI tools and their popularity, there are huge implications for society, and particularly for education, which is what we're here to talk about today. And particularly for education because a lot of the time the fear is about academic misconduct, people cheating, using ChatGPT to write their essays and then pretending that they wrote it themselves. But that's a bit of a narrow view, and we're going to try and widen that out as we discuss it this evening. So it's clear that AI in education needs urgent attention. UNESCO wrote some guidance, I think in September, about generative AI in education. And one of the things that I liked about what they said in the report is that generative AI tools, they're not just another thing that teachers have to learn to do to be digitally skilled, to be digitally literate. It's not like you can put it on a teacher's to-do list after learning how to use Teams. Generative AI tools are so profound that they are forcing us to think about what it is that we want people to learn when they go to school, what the purpose of our education system is and what matters in education. And I believe my colleague Jen made similar kinds of points when she gave her talk. We're going to focus those ideas specifically within the Scottish school system this evening. Another thing that UNESCO said was that it's important to have a human-centred use of AI, and that's one reason why it's disappointing to many people, myself included, that the Bletchley Summit didn't include representation from civil society as part of the discussion. Of course, big tech companies and government need to be involved in these discussions, but so do members of society, and particularly members of the education sector and children and young people. And we'll talk a little bit about that during this talk. UNICEF have policy guidance specifically on AI and children. And this is a really complicated area because we know that children use AI products in their lives now. In the introduction, we heard about grandchildren using Alexa, so very young children using Alexa. It's just part of the background of everyday life. And sometimes children are using products which have AI, but were not designed specifically for children. And there are a whole lot of issues there. So we need AI to support children's development and well-being and be inclusive. We need it not to be discriminatory. We need it to protect children's data and their privacy and make sure that children are safe from the darker sides of AI. But the two aspects that the report brings out, which I really want to focus on, are on the need to prepare children for what's happening with AI just now, but also in the future. And creating an enabling environment, a way that children and young people can be consulted about AI and give their views, not in a tokenistic way, but in a way which has action associated with it. And in fact, in Scotland, this is happening, I am proud to say, that learners should be consulted about the use of AI in their education. And in fact, there's a project going with the Children's Parliament and the Turing Institute just now. And you can see one of the members of the Children's Parliament has really said what I want to say here, which is that it's important for children to know about artificial intelligence because it's the future and it's good to learn new things when they affect our lives. Professor Muir's report speaks about learners at the heart of the new Scottish education system as a kind of building block of educational reform, is that learner voice and learner view should be really important to that. And that's why I think it's important that we have young people as part of the discussions today, and that it would be great for Goodison to have more events in the future about this. We're actually at the School of Informatics at the university. We're hosting some children from St Mary's Primary School in Leith to come and discuss the design of education system, AI education systems. If we focus now, though, on this aspect of preparing children and young people for the use of AI in the future, there are various options to look at here for how education systems can respond to AI. So one option is to do what has been done in Seattle, in Paris, in New York, and parts of Australia as well, is just to outright ban AI in school systems, say, no, we will have none of this here. Another option, which I have heard a lot of university members tempted to do, is just try to evade AI by moving to different forms of assessment. So evade AI in the sense of academic misconduct, try and avoid the potential problems of students plagiarising by submitting work written by AIs, because if you have everybody sitting high stakes exam in a room with pen and paper with invigilators walking up and down, then there's no way for AI to get into that loop. And for reasons which I will explain shortly, I think either banning or evading would be ducking our responsibility here. Whether we want it or not, we have AI in our lives. And we have a responsibility, I think, to help citizens become AI literate. And I'll say shortly what that is. So as part of helping to prepare children and young people for their lives with AI, I think that we should be adapting and developing new methods of assessment and policy. So adapting and reshaping our education system around AI. And it's a really good time to be doing it because we are in this period of educational reform where all kinds of new and interesting things are happening. We have a great opportunity here in Scotland for that. So I think it would be a mistake to ban or to evade, because that would be the tail wagging the dog. And I was trying to capture that in this strange picture generated by DALL-E of this robotic dog with the enormous wagging tail. And every time I wanted it to show the top of the dog's tail, but I kept generating the image higher and higher, and the tail kept growing and growing. So I stopped being sidetracked at that point. But what I'm really trying to capture here is that we shouldn't be assessing what's easiest to measure. And sometimes it's tempting to say, oh, well, you know, we have to avoid cheating, and high stakes exams are the best way to do that. And it's easy to mark high stakes exams. But that kind of misses the point, because we should be assessing what it is we want people to learn. And what we need people to learn now is we need to know about their knowledge and skills and attributes which are required by citizens in the age of AI. We're all living in the age of AI now, and education should reflect that. So what might that look like? Well, I went back to the Haywood report, which is about the independent review of assessment in Scotland. And one of the things I liked in that report is that it brings out the values of Scottish education as the words which are written on the mace of the Scottish Parliament: compassion, wisdom, justice, and integrity. And so when I was thinking about it now, I was thinking that what we need to do as part of educational reform collectively is to ensure that learners leave the Scottish school system able to create and use AI with just these values, with wisdom, compassion, justice, and integrity. And not only that they need to use AI, but they need to know how to create it, because I think this is an area where there will be lots of opportunities and lots of jobs. And the creation of new AI needs wisdom and integrity just as much as using it for everyday life as well. In the independent review, the Haywood review, it's really asking the questions, going back to basics about what does it mean to be an educated citizen in Scotland at this time, and what knowledge and skills are needed. And the report also acknowledges that AI is in fact one of these skills that learners are going to have to be able to work with. Or they say to cope with. I think it's more than cope. I think it's thrive with, to be part of the future of education. And this brings up the concept of AI literacy. And this has been something which people have spoken about in the literature for a few years now. And the definition I've got here is about AI literacy is a set of competencies that lets people to critically evaluate AI technologies. So this critical evaluation is absolutely key for reasons that I'll discuss shortly. But they should also be able to communicate and collaborate effectively with AI. So that's both communicating and collaborating with AI itself and using AI to collaborate with other humans. But people should be able to use AI as a tool online, at home, and in the workplace. So AI is going to be part of all these different sorts of settings, and of course in schools as well. So that's what we're moving towards. And I'll say incidentally that I don't think that requires curriculum reform specifically. So I don't think we need to go away and write the expectations and outcomes necessarily. I think it's probably in there already because they're written quite flexibly. It's a question more of supporting teachers, which I'll come back to. Now, within the proposed changes to the Scottish assessment system in high schools, just in case people aren't familiar with this, I know we have colleagues from Norway here. The idea is that there would be a kind of leaving certificate, which would be called the Scottish Diploma of Achievement. And within that, there would be programmes of learning of individual subjects, maybe similar to some of the subjects which are on offer just now, assessed in various ways, but also personal reflections from each student, which mentions the other sorts of skills that they've learned in their lives, maybe through community work or sport, volunteering. And also that project learning is a part of this as well, interdisciplinary project learning on challenge projects. And that, I think, is where AI can be particularly well integrated with what we're trying to do within the education system. So the report talks about how project learning will be important, and the proposal is that this project learning would be assessed by teachers in a form of continuous assessment in the classroom. And I think this is particularly a good match for the fears that people have around generative AI, because I think that teachers are already well placed to spot when, let's just say, when learners use old-fashioned forms of cheating, like getting somebody at home to help them or copying from another student. And teachers, because they know their learners so well over a long period of time, it's easier for them to be able to work out when somebody's performance changes dramatically. So I think that teachers' knowledge of the learners is a good way to guard against plagiarism from generative AI, but that also the very sorts of skills that we want to promote with project-based learning are ideal for developing the kind of critical thinking and problem-solving skills that we need for AI literacy, and which are needed to use generative AI effectively. So I think that generative AI can be part of such project-based learning, but also maybe the subject of the project-based learning. Maybe you do a large project about how AI is used in your community, or how it could be used within the school to make things better, to make people's lives better. But you might be wondering, and perhaps there's teachers in the audience, I hope there are, what that might look like in practice. So I thought I would share with you a sample assignment of from my course that I teach at the university. So this is for fourth year university students. And I just decided that I was going to embrace AI in this course, and the students are very welcome to use AI for their portfolio. But when they submit their portfolio, they have to do a statement which explains whether they created all the work in the portfolio by themselves, which would be fine because I don't want to force anybody to use AI, whether they adapted the materials from elsewhere, whether they worked in collaboration with one or more students, and if so, that's fine, but I need to know which students they worked with and what they each did. But then the student has to say which AI tools that they used and which parts of the portfolio and which AI tools were used for which bits, and what they learnt from working with the AI. And then this last part is critical because it's about to what extent they think that working with the AI made their final submission better. Why is it better to have used the AI than doing it all yourself? And I'm assuming, of course, that if they thought they were doing it better doing it themselves, they wouldn't have used AI at all. So I wouldn't be marking anything like that. So if they submitted something that does contain generative AI, why they think that enhances their skills? And this really gets to the whole question, because we want to use AI as when AI makes what we as humans can do better. Otherwise, it's not worth doing. So we really need to teach people how to think through what are my strengths and my weaknesses, and how can I use AI to augment areas that I am not so strong in. Now, there are reasons why people have to be critical of AI. And one of those, of course, is because, as I said at the beginning, generative AI makes stuff up. It's not reliable. It's called hallucination, but it's really just making stuff up there. So, for example, if you get it to write an essay, it might just make up entire research studies, including references, and you go and try and find the references and they don't exist. And it gets facts wrong as well. And if you're using an older system that was trained a year ago or something, it can't access current information. Now, last spring, some colleagues and myself at the university, we ran ChatGPT through our assignments and our exams. And our impression was that ChatGPT at that time was kind of like a high D, low C student. So it appeared to understand quite a lot of the key concepts, but it was quite muddled in places. Now, there are future generations like GPT-4, for example, and other competitors are actually quite a lot better than ChatGPT, but they still hallucinate. And as far as I know, it's a property of the statistical models used underneath that they are never going to be 100% reliable. And there's also concerns about bad actors deliberately using large language models to generate more misinformation. And as large language models write more and more of the text online, then the internet gets more and more swamped with misinformation. And so this aspect of being critical about information which you see online, and particularly being critical of information generated by an AI, is crucial for education. Now, if you ask ChatGPT how it thinks it should be used in education, it actually gives you reasonable output here. I don't expect you to read this small text, but I'll just highlight some important things. It recommends that people should be aware of potential biases and discrimination within AI systems. And it recommends that students should check and edit what it comes up with, that students should respect the intellectual property, and that they should be absolutely transparent that they are using AI. And you'll notice with the strange pictures that I've decorated with the slides with, I've always said the student name plus the AI system that they've used. I think we just need to get into the habit of attributing when AI is being used. So I just want to finish before we move on to the discussion section, which of course will be the most interesting part of the evening, but with some recommendations that I think are important given the topics we've discussed so far. So one thing is that I think that Scottish Government should, if they haven't done so already, establish a cross-sector commission on AI in education, and this was advised by the Hayward report. I think this is a really important thing to do because it's an issue which is not going away. It's going to get more and more pressing, and we need to be having those discussions now. It can't wait until next year. Can't wait 6 months, I wouldn't have thought. Another recommendation is that learners should be at the heart of decisions about AI within their own lives and within the education system. And it seems to me through the discussions and the way that the educational reform consultation has gone so far that children already are being included more as part of educational discussions now, which is really encouraging to see. I think that AI literacy should be integrated within the Scottish education system from early primary school. And as I said before, I don't necessarily think that needs a rewrite of the curriculum, but what it does need is support for teachers. And that's professional learning opportunities for teachers, which are flexible and where they can learn about AI, discuss it with their colleagues, and crucially that they have time to engage with it and work out how it fits in with their new practice. It shouldn't just be another thing that they have to cram into their already busy timetables. And another aspect of this is that it should be ongoing because AI is changing rapidly. And one of the curses of working in computer science like I do is that you're never up to date because something has always changed. And so it needs to be part of ongoing development for teachers. And the last point I'll just mention briefly is that I have a slight worry that we might end up with AI in our classrooms without ever quite meaning to. And by that, I mean that sometimes there are IT procurement decisions which are made about particular pieces of software which aren't necessarily informed by pedagogy or educational values. So one can imagine it would be possible to have, for example, the next release of the Microsoft Office suite will have generative AI built in. I think that before any kind of IT decision is made about that, then we should be thinking, well, do we actually want that in classrooms and what format do we want that in? So those are some recommendations that I've come up with, and maybe you can think of more. Maybe you heartily disagree with some of them, in which case it would be great to hear about that in the discussion. There are some links there. I think perhaps we can share the slides afterwards if anyone's interested, particularly for teachers in finding out more. But I'm going to stop talking now, but I'll just leave you with the discussion questions with a particularly disconcerting picture there. But the questions that I would like you to think about are, how can AI benefit everyone in the education system, and what fears and opportunities do we need to consider? And how can we make sure that AI is used responsibly and ethically in our education system? I'm particularly keen to hear from the young people, and perhaps if it would be possible, we could have the young people's group to report back first. And if you want to get somebody else, like one of your teachers, to present back, that's fine. You can write down the summary or explain to them, but it's really important to hear your views. Thank you very much.